"You'll regret this," a native girl said when the cowboy paid $2 for her at the auction. The sun scorched Dry Hollow until every board, every stone, seemed ready to burst into flame. At the center of town, a young Apache woman stood on the auction platform, wrists bound tight, her skin bruised beneath the noon glare, blood crusted at the corner of her mouth. Yet her stare remained unbroken, cold, bright, and proud. Men gathered around, their laughter as dry as the wind. "Won't last a week in a ranch yard." One spat. "Sell her for a cigar. It's more than she's worth." Another barked. Coins clinked. A half-empty bottle was waved as a bid. The trader grinned. "She's wild, but still breathing." "Who will start?" Then a single voice, steady and low, broke through the noise. $2. The square fell silent. $2, barely the price of a new pair of boots, or one night's drink at the saloon. The crowd roared with laughter at the foolishness. Through the dust stepped Robert Vance, the town's blacksmith, his coat streaked with ash, his eyes unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. He laid 2 silver coins on the table. "Not buying her," he said. "Just buying your mercy." He cut the ropes. The woman met his gaze. "You'll regret this," she said. "I won't obey you." "I've regretted worse," he answered. "Not today." The sun sank slow over Dry Hollow, leaving the town wrapped in copper haze. The wind carried the smell of hot iron and whiskey, the two things that kept men alive here or killed them faster. Saloons leaned against one another like drunks, horses stamped in the dirt street, restless under the heat that never quite faded after dark. At the far edge of town stood a squat building of stone and soot, Vance's forge. The clang of hammer and anvil had once been the heartbeat of Dry Hollow, but lately it came less often. Robert Vance, the blacksmith, lived alone behind that forge, a man of few words and fewer friends. He was broad-shouldered, with hands burnt and scarred from years of ironwork. The right side of his neck bore an old burn, twisted, pale, a souvenir from the war. He never spoke of it. People said he'd once been a soldier, maybe even a sergeant under Silas Dinsley, before the army disbanded and men scattered like ash. Now Dinsley ran wagons and trade goods. He called them, though everyone knew half of what he sold, breathed, and bled. That afternoon, when Robert paid $2 silver for the Apache girl, folks in Dry Hollow couldn't stop laughing. "The fool paid for trouble," they said at the saloon. "She'll cut his throat by dawn." But Robert didn't hear them. Or maybe he did, and chose to let the noise pass like wind through tin. The girl sat outside his forge now, wrapped in a blanket he'd left by the door. Her name Conti he learned only because she muttered it once, half asleep, as if reminding herself who she was. Her wrists were raw from the ropes. The marks would scar. He brought her a tin cup of water, said nothing, and went back to the forge. Inside, the place smelled of coal smoke, oil, and metal. The fire's orange glow painted his face with a tired light. Every strike of the hammer was measured. Like penance, he didn't look at her, not until she spoke. "Why did you do it?" He kept working. "Because someone had to." She gave a dry laugh, one that held no mirth. "You think $2 buys back what they took?" The hammer paused midair. The flame flickered. "No," he said quietly, "but it stops one more wound. Later." As dusk deepened, the first howl of wind came down from the desert. Robert stepped outside to latch the barn door and caught the faintest whiff of smoke, not the clean kind from his forge. This was wild, greasy, wrong. He turned toward the corral. Fire tore through the haystack and the stalls in a breath. The horses screamed. He ran for the buckets, shouting for help that wouldn't come. Dry Hollow watched from porches and windows, the same way it had watched the girls' auction, amused, detached, safe in its cruelty. By the time the flames died, The barn was a black skeleton against the night. Robert stood among the ashes, the heat licking at his boots. Behind him, Conti's voice came soft but steady. "I know who did this." He turned. She was staring into the smoke, eyes reflecting the fire. "It's Dinsley," she said. "The one who bought and sold us. The one you once rode with." The night fell heavy between them, and for the first time in years, Robert Vance felt the weight of a past he had tried to bury rising again from the flames. They left Dry Hollow before dawn. The smoke from the burnt barn still clung to the wind like a curse. Robert rode ahead, the reins loose in one hand, a rifle slung across his saddle. Behind him, Conti followed on a mare he'd barely managed to save from the fire. She rode straight-backed, silent, a strip of cloth covering the wound on her wrist. Neither spoke for miles. The land spread endless around them, brittle mesquite, dry gullies, and far-off ridges blurred by heat. Somewhere behind those ridges lay Pecos Basin, where Robert meant to start again, or maybe finish what he should have long ago. When the sun climbed higher, Conti broke the silence. "You didn't have to bring me." "I didn't," he said without turning. "You followed." Her voice was sharp, like flint striking stone. "You think I trust you, I don't need you to." The horse's hooves thudded over dry earth. For a while there was only wind, and the faint creak of leather. Then she spoke again. "Gieter. Dinsley, he burned my village. He sold my people." Robert's shoulders stiffened, but he said nothing. "I saw his face that night," she went on, "and the soldiers who followed him," her eyes fixed on his back. "Were you one of them?" He didn't answer. The silence was louder than confession. By noon they reached the rim of a canyon where the trail split into two narrow passes. Robert dismounted, studying the tracks in the dust. "We'll take the northern route. Less open ground, more hiding places," she said. "For them or for you." He looked at her, then really looked. The dirt on her cheeks couldn't hide the fierce steadiness in her eyes. "You'll live longer if you stop thinking everyone's your enemy." "Everyone is," she replied, and nudged her horse past him. That night, they made camp beneath a cluster of dead cottonwoods. The sky above was clear, black as coal dust, pricked with hard stars. Robert gathered wood in silence while Conti crouched nearby, sharpening a piece of scrap metal into a crude blade. When sparks rose from his flint, she flinched. He noticed. "You've seen too many fires." She glared. "So have you." Neither spoke after that. The wind moaned through the branches, carrying the smell of ash and old ghosts. Before dawn, the sound of hooves woke them both. Robert reached for his rifle, motioning for her to stay down, but she was already moving silent as a shadow. From the ridge above, two riders appeared, torches flickering. Dinsley's men. Robert fired once, hit the torch. Not the man. The flames dropped, scattering sparks. The riders bolted into the dark, shouting curses. When the last echo faded, Robert leaned against a boulder, breath ragged. Blood darkened his sleeve. "You're hit," Conti said, kneeling beside him. "It's nothing. Don't lie." She tore a strip from her deerskin skirt, pressed it to the wound. Her fingers were firm, quick, unafraid. "Hold still." The smell of cactus sap filled the air. She'd crushed it between her palms to stop the bleeding. His voice came low, strained. "You've done this before. For others," she said. "Not for men like you." He tried to speak again, but his words tangled into a groan. Fever climbed fast. She laid him down near the fire, watching his face twist in pain. Then, in the half-light, he muttered through clenched teeth, words she wasn't meant to hear. "I burned it. The camp. Children were inside." She froze. The world seemed to fall silent except for his ragged breathing. By morning, the fever had broken. He opened his eyes to find her sitting a few feet away, the knife across her knees, staring at the horizon. "You heard," he said. She didn't look at him. I did. Then why am I still breathing? Her voice was steady, almost weary. Because mercy isn't obedience. And hate doesn't feed the thirsty. He said nothing more. The desert wind moved between them, hot, dry, and alive. That day, when they rode on, she no longer followed 10 paces behind. She rode beside him. The trail carried them deeper into the Pecos Basin, where the land shimmered like hammered copper beneath the heat. Days blurred together, dusk by daylight, cold by night. Every breath tasted of iron and dryness. Yet between the stretches of silence, something fragile began to form. An unspoken rhythm. A quiet endurance shared by two people who had run out of places to hide. Robert rarely spoke unless he needed to. He rode with the same precision he used at the forge, careful, controlled. A man afraid of sudden things. Conti moved differently, alert, a fluid, her eyes scanning the horizon like a hawk. Sometimes she rode ahead, scouting for danger. Sometimes she simply wanted space. One morning, while he mended a broken horseshoe, she crouched nearby, watching the sparks. "You work like you're praying," she said. He didn't glance up. "Maybe I am." "To who?" He paused, not sure he listens anymore. She smiled faintly, not in mockery, but in recognition. "Then you understand the gods I know." Their voices faded into the hum of the desert. The world around them was vast, but no longer empty. At dusk, they reached a dry arroyo, where faint water trickled beneath the sand. Robert dug a shallow pit, coaxing out a slow seep of brown water. Conti crouched beside him, letting the mud cool her wrists. "You could have left me," she said suddenly. "I tried," he admitted. "Then why didn't you?" He met her gaze, steady and tired. "Because when you look at me, I see everything I ran from." She studied him for a long moment, then turned away. "That's not a good reason. It's the truth," he said. The wind rose, carrying a swirl of grit between them. For a heartbeat, the tension cracked into something almost tender. 2 days later, they crossed a stretch of salt flats that glowed white under the sun. Robert's sleeve was stiff with dried blood, his wound healing slowly. Conti insisted on cleaning it each night, her hands steady, even when his breath hissed through his teeth. "Your people taught you this?" he asked once. "Yes," she said. Before they were scattered, he watched her wrap the bandage with careful precision. "You were a healer." Her eyes flickered. "I was a daughter." That was all she said. But in the way her fingers lingered at the knot, he could almost feel the ghost of a childhood stolen too soon. By the 4th night, they reached the foothills of Davis Mountains. The air was cooler here, the rocks turning black and jagged under the moonlight. Robert slowed his horse as they approached the broken ruins of an old military outpost. The crumbled walls and rusted gate still bore the insignia of the regiment he'd once served under. He stopped, staring at the collapsed barracks. "I knew this place." Conti's voice was low. "The men who burned my village wore that same mark." He said nothing, only dismounted and walked to the base of a shattered flagpole. His hand brushed the iron ring still dangling from the rope. The sound it made was hollow, like the echo of a past that refused to die. She watched him for a long while, then asked, "Why did you follow orders like that?" He didn't turn. "Because I was too young to know what cowardice looked like. And now I know it by name." Their eyes met across the ruins, heavy with truths neither could soften. They made camp in a narrow ravine, sheltered from the wind. The firelight flickered over their faces, one weathered, one scarred by survival. Robert sat sharpening his old knife. Conti sat near the edge of the firelight, weaving thin strips of yucca into a cord. "Do you ever sleep?" she asked. "When the fire burns low, that's when the dead come," she said. He looked up. "Then maybe they still need something from us." Her lips parted as if to speak, then closed again. The fire popped. A few minutes later, she reached into her satchel and drew out a small carved token, a piece of bone etched with a sun symbol. She turned it in her fingers before setting it beside him. My father made this, before they took me. Robert stared at the carving, then at her. Keep it. I don't need reminders, she said. He picked it up anyway and handed it back. Reminders keep you human. She took it. Not to argue, but because his voice carried the same exhaustion she felt in her bones. When dawn broke, the desert beyond the mountains glowed in soft amber light. They ate in silence, packing their things. Before mounting her horse, Conti glanced toward him. You'll find him soon, she said. Dinsley, she nodded. And when you do what? Then he hesitated. Maybe I'll see if redemption has a face. She studied him, as if weighing the man against the words. If it does, it's never the one we expect. They rode on without speaking. The sun climbed, the land widened, and the distance between them finally began to feel less like a wall and more like a road. The path through Davis Mountains twisted like a scar, narrow ledges carved by storms, cliffs blackened by old fires. The air was thin, sharp as metal. Robert led his horse slowly through the rocks, his shoulders still stiff beneath his shirt. Canty followed close, her bow slung across her back, eyes sweeping the ridges above. By the time they reached the canyon mouth, the light had turned copper. Robert crouched, touching the dirt. Boot prints fresh. They're close, he said. Then we're too late, or too early, Conti murmured. She was right. A sudden echo hooves. Voices. 4 riders appeared from behind the ridge, rifles glinting. Dinsley's men. Robert pulled his gun but didn't fire. Stay behind the rocks. Canty ignored him. In one motion, she tore an arrow from her quiver, fitted it to the bow, and fired. The first rider fell with a cry, tumbling from his saddle. The others fired back. Bullets sparked against stone. Robert fired once, twice, hitting the rifle of the second man, not his chest. Shoot to kill, she shouted. He reloaded calmly. I'm done killing. A bullet grazed his thigh. He stumbled, rolled behind a boulder. Canty dropped beside him. Breath ragged. You'll die trying to be a saint. He looked at her, sweat running down his neck. Better that than die as what I was. They fought until the canyon fell silent again. The wind returned, howling through the pass. 3 men lay still. One crawled away, clutching his arm, disappearing into the brush. Robert leaned against the rock, breathing hard. His rifle trembled slightly in his hand. You could have finished them, Canty said, wiping dust from her face. He shook his head. You think blood answers blood. I thought so too, until the day I watched it dry. For a moment, anger flickered in her eyes, but beneath it was something else, a recognition of the same torment that lived in her. They dragged the bodies into the ravine, covered them with loose stone. When they returned to the trail, neither spoke for hours. The silence between them had changed. It wasn't distrust now, but something heavier, like mourning. By nightfall, they reached an abandoned trading post, half buried under sand. The wooden sign creaked in the wind. Letters nearly erased Harlan's supply. Robert pushed the door open. The hinges screamed. Inside, the shelves were bare, except for a few rusted cans and a broken lantern. He lit a small fire in the hearth. Conti moved through the shadows, searching. In a corner chest, she found a bundle wrapped in cloth. She unrolled it and froze. Inside lay a silver bracelet, tarnished but unmistakable, carved with the sun symbol of her clan. Her fingers trembled as she lifted it. Robert stepped closer. That's yours. Her throat tightened. It was my mother's. He nodded. Then take it. She did, and for the first time since he'd met her. Her eyes glistened. Why would you give it to me? Because you were meant to have it, he said simply. Not men like Dinsley. Not me. She turned the bracelet in her hand, the firelight catching its edge. You think this forgives you? He shook his head slowly. No, But maybe it lets me remember without lying. The wind outside rose again. Whistling through the gaps in the boards, Conti sat beside the fire, clutching the bracelet like it might disappear if she let go. Her voice was a whisper. When I was a child, my father told me the sun never dies. It only hides to rest. I used to believe him. Robert stirred the coals. Maybe he was right. Some of us just burn longer before we sleep. They sat there until the fire turned to embers. The night stretched quiet, but neither wanted to sleep. By morning, rumors had already begun to spread. In the nearby mining camps, men whispered of a white blacksmith traveling with an Apache wolf girl, hunting Silas Dinsley. Some said she'd bewitched him. Others swore he'd lost his mind to guilt. Either way, they were marked. At midday, a scout rode hard to warn Dinsley that the pair were coming. The old soldier turned traitor only laughed, his teeth yellow in the lamplight. "Vance," he said, "that coward's finally found his conscience." He poured himself another drink and muttered, "We'll see how long it lasts." The following evening, Robert and Conti reached the edge of Big Bend territory. The sky, bruised purple and red. From the cliffs above, the Rio Grande glimmered like molten glass. Beyond it, hidden among the boulders, smoke rose from a cluster of shacks, Dinsley's new stronghold. Conti watched in silence, her jaw tight. "He's down there," Robert nodded, "and half a dozen men with him." She unslung her bow. "Then we end it tonight." He caught her wrist. "No, not like this." Her eyes flared. "You'd let him live, I'd let you live," he said, voice rough. "Killing him won't free you from him. It never does." She pulled away, trembling. "He killed my father, sold my mother, my brother." "I know," Robert said, "and I helped him once. But if you spill his blood, you'll carry his shadow. I've carried it long enough." She looked at him then, truly looked, seeing not the man who'd once served Dinsley, but the one who'd chosen to face him now. The firelight caught the silver bracelet on her wrist. Her hand lowered. "Then we finish this your way." Robert exhaled slowly, like a man finally stepping out of his own grave. That night, the storm gathered over the desert. Lightning flickered beyond the ridges, thunder rolling like drums of war. As they crept down toward the river camp, the wind tore at their coats, carrying sand and the smell of rain. Somewhere below, Dinsley's men were laughing over a fire, unaware that the ghosts of their past were walking straight toward them. The storm broke over Big Bend just before midnight. Rain fell in slanted sheets, hissing against rock and river alike. Through the blur of lightning, Robert and Conti moved like shadows down the slope toward Dinsley's camp. A half-collapsed shack stood at the river's edge, lamplight leaking through its cracks. Inside, voices rose above the storm, Dinsley's rasping laugh among them. Robert crouched behind a boulder, water dripping from his hat. "We go quiet," he whispered. "We need the ledger his records. It'll show every name, every sail." Conti nodded, but her jaw was set hard. Her bow was ready, eyes gleaming with the reflection of lightning. They slipped closer. 2 guards sat near the door, rifles across their laps. Robert crept behind them, striking one with the butt of his gun, while Conti's arrow cut through the rain, silencing the other. They dragged the bodies aside. Inside, Dinsley poured whiskey into a tin cup, muttering about fools chasing ghosts. He didn't hear the door creak until Robert stepped in. The older man looked up, eyes narrowing. "Well, hell, Robert Vance. Thought you'd burned up with your conscience." Robert's voice was steady, low. "You should have stayed dead to me." Dinsley laughed. "And miss this, you always were the soft one. Couldn't stomach orders. Couldn't stomach blood." He lifted the revolver from the table, spinning the cylinder. "Guess you came to fix that." Conti emerged from the shadows, bow drawn. The sight of her made Dinsley freeze for half a breath, then smirk. "The little savage lives. I remember your father screaming. Her arrow trembled. Point steady at his chest. Robert moved closer. Voice sharp. Don't. She didn't lower the bow. He burned them alive. Dinsley sneered. And you think one arrow makes you clean? The room seemed to pulse with thunder. Then, from outside, a gunshot cracked. Dinsley flinched. His own man, panicked, had fired through the doorway. Chaos erupted. Another man burst in, shouting. A second shot rang out. Robert lunged, shoving Conti aside as a bullet ripped through the wall. The lamp toppled, flames spilling across the floor. Dinsley turned to run, but one of his men frightened. Greedy raised his gun. The gold's mine. Old man. The shot hit Dinsley square in the chest. He fell backward, crashing into the burning table. The others fled into the storm. Conti stood over the dying man. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she dropped her bow. The arrow clattered beside the body. I won't let you take more of me, she whispered. Robert watched the flames curl around the edges of the shack. He found the ledger, a small, water-stained book beside Dinsley's hand. On one page, in a faded scrawl, he saw a name, Maria, taken to Santa Fe. Ichembabe Basher. He turned to Conti. Your mother. She looked at the words, her expression unreadable in the flickering firelight. She's alive. Maybe, he said. Or maybe this is the only proof she ever lived. Conti took the book gently, as though it were made of glass. Then we follow this trail. Robert nodded. We will. Lightning split the sky. He reached out, taking her wrist to pull her from the collapsing shack. For a moment their hands met, his scarred, hers steady, and they ran into the rain together as the roof caved in behind them. They didn't stop until the storm had spent itself. The Rio Grande roared below, swollen and silver under the breaking dawn. They sat beneath an overhang, soaked and shaking, the ledger resting between them. Robert's voice came rough with exhaustion. You could have killed him. I know. Why didn't you? She looked out at the river, the water catching the first light of morning. Because hate is easy, and I'm done being easy to understand. He exhaled, long and slow. You're stronger than I ever was. Conti turned toward him, her face calm, almost soft. No, you just finally stopped running. For the first time, he smiled, small, uncertain, but real. As the sun rose, the rain thinned to a mist. The world smelled clean again. They loaded their gear in silence. Before mounting her horse, Conti paused. What will you do now? She asked. Keep riding north, he said. You. She looked toward the mountains. Find what's left of my mother. He nodded. Then that's the same road. They rode out side by side, the wind at their backs, the smell of wet earth following them, a scent of endings, and of something just beginning. The road north wound through weeks of silence and sky. The desert slowly gave way to pine, to thin mountain air that smelled of rain and stone. The Mogollon Rim rose ahead, a land of whispering trees and lonely missions built by hands long gone. By the time they reached the valley, the season had turned. Wildflowers pressed through the cracks of old trails, and the rivers ran clear from melted snow. Conti rode slightly ahead now, her hair unbound, the silver bracelet flashing in the sunlight with every movement of her wrist. Robert followed behind, his beard untrimmed, his clothes mended more by her hands than his own. They spoke little. Yet each night by the fire, their silences said more than words. She had stopped flinching when the flames cracked. He had stopped waking in the dark, gasping from dreams of burning tents. The mission appeared one morning through a curtain of fog, a modest chapel of adobe and timber, its bell tower leaning to one side. An old woman tended the small garden beside it, humming to herself as she cut herbs. When Conti called out, the woman straightened slowly, turning her head. Her hair was silver white, her face lined but strong, and though one eye was clouded with blindness, The other fixed sharply on the girl approaching. For a heartbeat. Nothing moved. Then the woman dropped the shears and took a halting step forward. Conti. The name trembled out of her like a prayer forgotten too long. Conti stopped mid-path. The world seemed to sway, her throat too tight to speak. Then she nodded. Once. The woman's hands rose, weathered, shaking as they found Conti's face. She traced the lines of her daughter's cheeks, the curve of her jaw, and whispered, "They said none survived. But I knew the son does not die." Conti fell into her mother's arms, silent tears cutting paths through the dust on her skin. Robert turned away, giving them the privacy of grief too sacred to witness. Later, inside the chapel, Conti sat beside her mother while the older woman spoke softly of years lost, of being taken north by traders, sold to missionaries who gave her shelter but never let her leave. Her sight had faded, but her memory hadn't. "And your brother?" Conti asked. The old woman's lips trembled. "He was taken east. Texas, they said. A boy too young to fight, too wild to tame." Conti bowed her head. "Then he's still somewhere under the same sky." Her mother reached for her hand. "The land remembers what men forget. If he still breathes, the wind will carry him to you." Robert stood in the doorway, watching as dawn filtered through the stained glass, painting both women in red and gold. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he stepped forward, holding out a small object wrapped in cloth. "The ledger," he said. "It's yours now." Conti took it gently, her eyes flickering with gratitude. "You found what you came for," she said. "Forgiveness." He shook his head. "Not forgiveness. Just the courage to live without it." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Then maybe that's what forgiveness really is." Days passed. Robert helped mend the mission's fence, repaired the bell frame, and forged new hinges for the chapel door. He found peace in the rhythm of hammer and fire again, this time not to erase the past, but to shape something after it. Conti spent her mornings in the hills, gathering herbs with her mother, her laughter rare and low echoing through the pines. In the evenings, she returned to the forge, sitting nearby as Robert worked. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes not. One night, she brought her small notebook, the same one she'd written in since they left Dry Hollow, and read aloud by lantern light. "Not everyone we seek still waits ahead, but the road is lighter when someone walks beside you." She closed the book, glancing toward him. "You taught me that." Robert smiled, faint lines deepening at the corners of his eyes. "Then I finally built something worth keeping." A week later, as they prepared to leave, Conti stood beside the river that ran behind the mission. The water shimmered with morning light, the same light that had once burned her world to ash. She dipped her hand into it, feeling its chill, its strength. When she turned, Robert was on the bank, hammering the final nail into a new horseshoe. Sparks flew, catching briefly in his beard before fading. She watched him a moment, then crossed the river stones toward him. "Do you remember what I said in Dry Hollow?" she asked. "That I'd regret buying you," he said with a crooked smile, "and that I'd never obey you." He looked up. "You haven't." She reached into her satchel, pulled out 2 silver coins tarnished, edges worn smooth, and set them on his anvil. "Then I'm paying you back." He frowned. "For what?" "For the fire you stopped, for the road you shared, for not asking me to be anything but myself." He touched 1 coin, then her hand. "You don't owe me." "I know," she said softly. "That's why it matters." The sky that evening burned the color of iron and blood. From the ridge above, the Davis Mountains glowed red in the dying sun, their peaks scarred but beautiful, like wounds that had learned to heal. Robert stood beside her, the scent of forged smoke and pine mixing in the air. She looked toward the horizon, her voice quiet. "When people see scars, they think of pain, but the land has them too, and it still breathes." He nodded, following her gaze. "Scars mean it lived." She turned to him, a rare, small smile ghosting across her lips. Then so do we. The sun slipped behind the mountains, leaving the sky streaked with fire. In its reflection on the river below, the world seemed to burn again, but this time, it was a gentle, cleansing flame, and for the first time since Dry Hollow, both of them let it burn.